Welcome to the Thoughtful Leader podcast. My name is Ben Brearley. I'm a leadership coach and the founder of Thoughtful Leader. The Thoughtful Leader podcast is all about short, sharp leadership advice because thoughtful leadership is good leadership. Welcome to episode 321 of the Thoughtful Leader podcast. In this episode, I'm going to be talking about the topic of induction. And by that, I mean inducting a new person into your team or organization. So let's get into this topic right now. Now, induction is one of these topics that I find when I first think of it, I think it is really, really boring. To me, it's an administrative thing. Okay, we've got an induction process. We're going to introduce people into the team. And I find it quite, from a leadership perspective, I don't find it very interesting at all. So sometimes I have to deliver training, and in one of the training modules, we might talk about induction. It's actually quite a dry topic, but I'm really not selling this episode very well, but I'm getting to that. But actually, induction is a super important part of the employee life cycle, let's call it, when people join your team, because it is the first impression of your team or organization, and first impressions can have a lasting impact on performance. And there's some research done previously, I noticed a while back now, where people that have a poor induction or a poor experience when they first enter the workplace are much more likely to leave that workplace early or earlier than what you'd like. And so it's really a great first impression. Induction is a super important part of getting someone into the workplace. Now, why is that? Well, firstly, it's that first impression that I just mentioned. But secondly, what we're trying to do here when we're inducting a new team member is we're trying to incorporate or introduce that feeling of belonging, that the person belongs in the workplace, they are accepted as part of the group and the team, and they feel like they belong and that they are part of that area or that team that you're working in. Now, belonging is actually similar to the concept of relatedness. If you remember a couple of episodes back on my blog post, sometimes I talk about the SCARF model of motivation, and the R in that model is relatedness, which basically means how connected do you feel to the people around you? Do you relate to them or do you feel excluded? So the induction process is one of the first ways that you help people to feel part of your team and included in the team. So it's that belonging that was actually really important, because obviously if the opposite of belonging is you feel ostracized or alone or isolated, and all of those things are super demotivating and can have people leaving your team early. So there's a couple of different tips I want to give you on inductions and when I've seen them done well and not so well. And the first example I'll give you is an example of where it was not done well. And this happened to me quite a few years ago now in one of my roles where I took on a new management position in an organization. And this organization had just been taken over in the last 3 to 6 months by a company on the east coast of Australia. So therefore, what had happened is we were still in transition, and so the company that had been bought out still didn't have a really good management structure or anything like that. So there weren't potentially the people in the organization that you would think would be in place at that time because they were going through this transition of ownership. So that's really the reason, I think, behind this problem. But what happened was I was told to come in at 8:30 a.m. And so I arrived at 8:30 in the building. Now this building had a central reception, which led, and then they would take you to the other floors where these other businesses were, where I was going to be working. And the central reception was there, and they told me, I've just called them, no one's answering. So no one had arrived at the office yet at 8:30 a.m. or at least was not answering their phone. So basically, I went and waited at a nearby cafe, just got a coffee and sort of sat there for a while, waiting to be let into the building. And eventually I went back and someone was there and someone let me in. But it was obvious that they didn't really know I was starting. They didn't know I was meant to be coming into that office. I didn't really have equipment or anything ready to go. My desk wasn't really ready. All these sort of things just implying that no one really knew I was coming. And I put that down to not like malicious or ignorance on the part of the people there, but more about this transition that the organization was going through, which made the induction process just a shambles. Now, and it didn't make me feel great on the day, although I didn't really hold it against people. I knew what they were going through in terms of this transition and the acquisition that was happening in the organization. But it did leave a bad taste in my mouth, I must admit. And I still think about it now as a really bad example of how to induct someone or how to onboard someone. Because it is that first impression. And the first impression I got of that organization was that it was a chaotic mess. And actually that impression was solidified throughout my time working there as well. So it all sort of all made sense in the end. But one of the first things I'd recommend in an induction is you want the process of induction to be structured and repeatable. And by structured, I mean maybe you create yourself a little checklist. Here are the things we're going to go through. Here's the things I'll tell the new starter. Here's what I'll show them the facilities and all that sort of stuff. So you want it to be a structured process that is repeatable in that people can do it in a repeatable manner. So whoever is onboarding is going to be running through the same process no matter who it is. So what you don't want is people just having their own personal slant on onboarding, because you'll notice that some people in your workplace are very attentive to a new starter's needs, and they'll go over and above to make sure that people feels welcome and knows what's going on. But other people will just go, yeah, here's your desk, see you later, right? People just have different approaches and perceptions of what the onboarding process should be like. So if you make it repeatable in a structured way, then you can get a more consistent experience from team member to team member, rather than one team member has a really good experience, another one has a really bad one, because different people were involved in the onboarding. So that's one thing I would say. Structured and repeatable is the first thing. The second thing I think you want to focus on is connection. So what you're trying to do here is you're helping people feel connected to the workplace and the team members and others in the organization. You want that person to build connections as quickly as possible so that they feel that sense of belonging I spoke about earlier. So there's a couple of ways to do this. Well, firstly, you want to introduce them to the team and the people they'll be working with. And a good thing that happened once in a different organization to me was I came in and my boss actually organized a bunch of meetings and put them in my calendar already, where I could meet other senior people in the organization, find out what they did, and got to be introduced to them. And so it's sort of like half an hour catch-up meetings where I could learn about the different parts of the organization and meet the people, recognize the faces in the room as well. Now that was all quite positive because it meant also that when I saw people around the office, they knew who I was because they'd already met me, and therefore I felt a bit more connected to that workplace. I didn't feel like a stranger. So it's about connecting people to the team and others. Another thing that's a really useful thing that some organizations have done in the past, for me, have been having a buddy system. So the buddy is someone who is your contact point. So obviously you have your direct line manager who's going to onboard you, but you'll also sometimes have a buddy, which could be someone else in the team or the organization that acts as a contact point for you so that you can go and talk to someone. If you have questions, you can reach out to them and they're sort of agreed to be your buddy for that onboarding period. There's a couple of things that I find useful in this. And when I had a buddy in one organization, they actually gave me a buddy from a different team. So it wasn't my own team. It was actually a different team in the organization. I actually found that really useful for connection because it meant that I had more connections other than just the immediate team members that I got introduced to. So having a buddy outside your team can be really useful because sometimes you might feel like you're asking a stupid question as well, and you don't want to do that to your team members or the other people in your team, for example. So a buddy system, I think, is quite useful as something to get up and running as well. And the next thing you want to incorporate in your induction is familiarity. And this is a combination of familiarity with the people and the places that the person will have to work in. So the places is quite simple, right? Where are they going to work? Where's their desk? Do they have the materials? Provide them with all the things they need to do their job. Make sure they understand where the bathrooms are. If maybe they cycle to work, maybe they want to use the change rooms or the shower facilities or whatever it might be. Give them access and make sure that you have that you give them that familiarity and the induction in terms of where are the facilities, where are the places to go. And obviously familiarity with people as well. So you introduce them to the right people, which we talked about in the connection step. But familiarity is important because it feels like you are part of it. You understand where things are. It's not all which can cause people anxiety and stress if you're not familiar with the places you're working. Now, in terms of workload, I've always found it perfect or better in onboarding is to have some work to do, but not be overwhelmed with being thrown in the deep end. So I think it is good, and most organizations these days have a series of training courses you'll have to do as part of your induction. So, basically run this online training module on health and safety, how to lift a heavy box, all this sort of stuff, right? Manual handling, they call it. Now, and also HR policies and procedures. Now, those sort of modules, can be quite boring to run through, but they're necessary. But you don't want someone to just do that all day, every day, because it's quite boring. The other thing you don't want is for people to be doing nothing all day, because that is really uncomfortable. It's really uncomfortable feeling when you know that you should be doing something to earn your money, but you've actually got nothing at all to do and you've been provided with no work. But because you're not familiar with the workplace or the environment yet, you can't really go and be proactive and get your own work yet. So you sort of end up just sitting there and doing a lot of reading, which is extremely boring. So make sure that you don't overwhelm them with work. You want to find the happy medium where they have something to get started on, but not overwhelmed either in the deep end. And the last thing I'll mention is as the manager or leader who's doing the onboarding, what I would recommend is you actually block out time. What I'd recommend is you block out time to actually do the onboarding yourself. So rather than say delegate it or someone else has to do it because you're going to be in meetings all morning, I would make an effort to try to block out that calendar and save and secure that time so that you show your face and actually take charge of that onboarding. It's just a good sign, I find, when a manager commits that time because they're showing that personal investment they're willing to make to bring you into the organization or the team rather than relying on other people to do it and running about and doing back-to-back meetings while you're left in the corner by yourself. So even though you might be very busy, what I would recommend is you take that time to at least book out an hour or two where you can sit with them and actually provide that support to bring them in on the first day. It's a good show of faith. It's a good show that you're there to, you're there to invest that time in them. And it helps them feel valued as well. And I think that's part of it. It's part of the belonging, but part of the feeling valued as well, that they're important enough for you to spend time with them, even though you have a busy role to play in the organization. So those things, again, you want it to be structured and repeatable. You want to build connection with the team and other people they need to know. So have a buddy or something like that. You also want to build familiarity. You don't want to overwhelm them. You want to give them the happy medium of work, which is something to do, but not nothing to do. So in the medium there, but not overwhelmed either. And you want to commit the time and actually invest that time in the onboarding so that they feel welcome in your team. So those are my thoughts on inductions. And as you might expect, it can be a pretty dry topic, but it's actually really important because you will find that the better your induction, the quicker that people will become more a part of the fabric of your team. They will start to speak up more earlier because they feel connected and familiar with the environment. And hopefully they will feel safe as well to share their opinions and thoughts, so that you sort of run through the onboarding process and the getting them up to speed a bit faster than them feeling isolated or that they don't belong. Because remember, the induction is a first impression to your team. So it's really important that we get it right and focus on it. It's not the most glamorous topic, but it's one of those things that can be a real demotivator if it's done badly. So those are my thoughts on inductions. I'm interested in your thoughts on this one. What do you do for inductions? What makes them good? What's the worst induction you've had as well? Or your worst onboarding process? I'd love to hear about that. They always make me laugh. So get in touch on the show notes page. That will be thoughtfulleader.com/podcast/321 is the show notes for this episode. Leave a comment. I would love to hear of your good and bad onboarding experiences. Yeah, so let me know on that page. Thank you for listening once again. Keep up the thoughtful leadership, and I'll be back next week.